Welcome back to another Burgundy Unpicked podcast. A bit of a bite-sized one, well, for us anyway, where we're just having a little focus on one of our exclusivities and the relationship that we treasure very much. And it's a Château de la Tour in within the walls of Clos de Vougeot, the largest Grand Cru in Burgundy. I'm joined with Guy.
Hello. Hi, Joe.
Hello. And René back for another pod. Hello, René.
Hi, Joe. Welcome.
Thank you very much. That's nice. Yeah, no one ever welcomes me. Yeah.
For a
like
change.
So we want to focus, and, those who are aware of the wines already will then maybe understand why we think it's going to be sort of bite-sized, because Château de la Tour it makes 3 wines when it's producing all of them. Great, all Grand Cru, obviously, Clos de Vougeot. But we might touch a little bit on Pierre Labet, which is where the other part of the family ownership of domains. So where would be good to start? It's currently François Labet, who's sort of running the show, if you like, and his son Édouard, who's taken over more and more, and who manages it now, pretty much throughout the estate, and makes the sort of the hard choices, or certainly discusses them with his dad and suggests what they should be doing in terms of the farming, in terms of the winemaking. His influence is very much embedded in the domaine, which we'll talk about as well. But René, maybe was your first visit there? I know we touched a bit upon it in a previous pod, but maybe you want to give your sort of first impressions, because it's quite cool, isn't it? Like for me, when I went at first, you've got the Clos, a huge wall all the way around Vougeot. There's the Château de Clos de Vougeot, which is the big building within the vineyard, where obviously has a lot of history with wine being made, vinified and produced, bottled, and that's from Negociant, as well as some domain holdings across centuries. They hold a lot of events there, so a lot of people go to Vougeot. The music event is there. You've got the wine and hip hop events there. So there's a lot that goes on. So that's in the background. But just before it, you've got the only other building, Château de la Tour. It's quite a cool one as well.
It is really cool. And when you hear the word for the first time, first time you hear about Château de la Tour, you think of Château in Burgundy. It's a bit tricky. But when you go there and see the building, it really is almost castle-like. And you enter from, there's a fence, and you go in, and you really see how well prepared the building is for winemaking. So you've got a nice bit in front where all the cleaning, I think they were cleaning some machinery when we were there in October. And then you go up to this beautiful tasting room with a massive wooden table in the middle, and all the walls and all the decorations. It's really impressive for the first time. We were tasting with Édouard, so François wasn't there when we visited. But it was great to see him, and great to taste on his local soil, and see his passion, really, because he's a young, passionate winemaker, which is, there's this wave in Burgundy, and we often talk about the young guns in Burgundy and the young winemakers and what they bring to the table. And with the pedigree of Château de la Tour, and with the family history, Édouard is really bringing a lot of potential and a lot of new ideas, and this dynamic attitude to the wines of Château de la Tour, which is great to see and great to taste for them.
Yeah, indeed. They've got a long-standing relationship with Cornet Barra. Since we've joined Guy, we've obviously been a mainstay for our Burgundy range. François, I think, is great. There's a lot of personality and character there, and I've had several great dinners over the years with him. Got to know Édouard very well also, and I think, I agree. I think he's brilliant. He's been an exceptional addition to the domain, if you like, because not everyone always wants to follow necessarily their parents' footsteps, and I'm sure it crossed his mind whether he did or he didn't. And thankfully he's settled very much that is the path, because the first time I met Édouard, I think it was about 15 years old, and I smuggled him into Annabelle's in Mayfair. I was having a dinner with François and some customers, and he was just in town, and we sort of managed to sort of persuade them that they were 18. We'll just keep that secret between us, won't we? But so I've known Édouard for a while, seen him grow in the role, as have you, Guy. And I think he's bringing some changes about.
No, it's great. It really feels like a sort of family relationship almost, and they've been such long-standing supporters of CMB, and vice versa. We've really sort of tried to give the wines the prominence we feel they deserve for a long time. And some of my earliest memories from going to Burgundy with Alison Buchanan, for example, were going and seeing Francois and really seeing the early days of when Édouard was beginning to be integrated into the family setup. So no, it was a really good visit. And then actually, Joe, you and I went back in November, and Francois was kind enough to open up the chateau for us. And we were terribly late because of an EasyJet delay. And then we got stuck chatting to somebody in a cellar in Rue Saint-Georges. And we were, I was sort of hoping that he was going to be late because he was coming from elsewhere, but I think he was on time. And
sorry, Francois.
So our apologies, mea culpa. And we really appreciate the fact that you opened up and allowed us to taste a second time, because, you know, going in October, I love to visit Burgundy at that time of year, but the wines are not always ready. You know, that you are seeing a really sort of gestating product at that stage, and going back even a month later in November, you get a much better feel for what the wines are like.
Yeah.
So that was good.
Well, I mean, so for me, Clos de Vougeot and Château Latour are synonymous. It is, as we've said, the only estate in the vineyard, and it's the only one, you know, all it makes is Clos de Vougeot. It makes red Grand Cru from various plots, which maybe we'll just go into a little bit. It's about 5.5 hectares off the top of my head from memory that they have of Clos de Vougeot. And they make their sort of, if you like, their straight Clos de Vougeot, the Cuvée Classique, which sort of the name suggests. This is their sort of classical style of Clos de Vougeot and how they want to portray the vines from that year. They have the Vieilles Vignes, the old vines, which, I mean, has some mega age behind it. And then in certain years, when the quality is of sufficient outstanding level, they will then do homage to Jean Morin, which are the very oldest vines.
So the homage, I think, started in the 2010 vintage, and the uniqueness of it is that they only use the bud from the first bud on each cane. So, you know, it really is the best and most concentrated juice that is separated out in some years into that cuvée. It must be said that in 24 and also in 23, they haven't actually made the homage. So in a sense, you know, the Vieilles Vignes is a supercharged Vieilles Vignes this year because it includes that fruit. And the core of the family's holdings in the Clos de Vougeot is a plot from 1910, and there are a dwindling number of vines that date back to that time, but there are still some, and that's really the core of the VV fruit. So yeah, just 2 wines in 2024, and they were both fantastic, and they both really have their own personalities. But shall I start just by saying a little bit about the history of the domaine?
Yeah, I think that's good, yeah.
I'll do it in a sort of whistle-stop tour, but it was established in 1890. It's the largest owner, as you said, Joe, of the Clos de Vougeot. Vougeot itself, as those of you who've been to Burgundy will know, is located wonderfully. It's in between Vosne-Ramenais and Chambon-Musigny. So it's kind of hallowed terroir, and it's unique because it's such a big vineyard. And the 5.5 hectares that the Labet family own constitutes a mere 11% of the appellation. So to own double figures off the appellation in percentage terms is amazing. But, you know, it is it's a big clos. And so there are various different styles of wine made within the Clos de Vougeot. And that's why you need to, associate stylistically with the producers that you like that style of wine. As you said, there are 3 buildings within the Clos. So there's one sort of tiny little shack, which is also owned by Château de Latour, which I think they should turn into some sort of event space or super top restaurant or something. That would be quite cool. The Château de Latour holdings came down via Francois' mother's family. And by contrast, the sister domaine of the family is called Domaine Pierre Labet, and that came down through Francois' father's side of the family. So you have these 2 sort of converging vineyard holdings, which are now both under the Labet family, running both of them. Francois has been the president of the BIVB, the Bourgogne Wine Board, since 2015. He literally just this month finished his 2nd term as president of that. And he's been, by all accounts, a very popular president of it, and was awarded the Légion d'honneur as part of his sort of efforts there and elsewhere as part of the Burgundy sort of efforts for the UNESCO and all of that side of things as well. Édouard, as you said, Joe, is now very much a part of the vineyard team and the domaine team, and he's increasingly sort of the face that we see in the UK, and he goes out to Hong Kong and Asia as well, and sees our teams out there as well. So, they really are great ambassadors for C&B in that sense. The only final thing to say is that Sylvain Pataille, who some of you might know from Marcenay, has been their consultant winemaker for a long time, and so he's sort of the third wheel of the domaine, and very much an important third spoke, maybe I should say, very much an important part of the domaine.
Yeah, I mean, and I think jumping on what you said about Édouard being part of the vineyard team as well, because I think that's, I don't know, I'm actually going to ask him next time I see him, but for me, the impression I get is that's what grabbed his love first, is being in the vineyards. And I'd say whenever we've obviously had appointments, but I've also been in Burgundy where I've popped in as we've driven by and seen the gates are open. I'd say 70-80% of the time when I've done that, he's just in the vineyard. He's always out. And so I think he's learned a hell of a lot there. You were saying, René, quite rightly, people quite often forget they've been organic since sort of 92, and they're very much follow what I think is, the best route of farming with sustainable. It's with quality in mind, and some people will say, biodynamics should be possibly considered the apogee, but I'm not sure it is in today's climate anyway. So he immersed himself in there. He's then obviously tackled all the sort of the essentials that you need to, getting over years and years of experience and training, the winemaking and vinification side. And I know he's tried to sort of change a few things there, certainly in the whites.
Yeah. I mean, René, we when we were there, he was talking, wasn't he, about sort of trying to move to a style of white winemaking where he's doing slightly heavier crushing, he's working the must a bit more reductively, and he's looking to get more extract in the wines.
Exactly, and I think that's a very good point, Joe, that you mentioned about the vineyards and about the how important it is for the domaine, and for Édouard himself. He loves talking about vineyards and about farming is the main priority for every domaine in Burgundy. Proper farming, and mostly in vintage like 2024, when it was difficult, it really shows when people have the dedication to stay in the organic certification. I think they've done about 23 sprays in the vintage, and that by sprays obviously we don't mean something massively chemical, but they're organically certified, so it's all very much sustainable and within the regulations. But yeah, that's something that is really important for them and really matters to Édouard. As you mentioned, Guy, about the whites, that's super important, and I think super really cool, because they have changed their approach quite significantly, I think, from the previous years, and to great results, I believe. They've also included some foudres, so some of the whites are now aged partly in foudre, partly in the 350 and 450 liter oak barrels. A bit more solids, a bit more extract. The wines have a different texture. They just feel more energetic. And I think the 2024 whites, once they come about, they'll be brilliant.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, we're talking about the wines of Domaine Pierre Labet here.
Exactly.
There is a sort of approach that runs through both domains, and one of the things is whole bunch fermentation, which is very much a sort of part of the winemaking style at both domains. In 24, they kept it to a maximum of, I think it was 20%, he said. Yeah. So there isn't as much as you would normally see, just because they had this terribly embattled growing season in 24. They lost 60% of their crop in the Clos de Vougeot. They did two very rigorous sortings, and the final crop came in at 19 hectoliters per hectare. So that's pretty tiny volume-wise. But, They've played it safe, but the wines themselves, I mean, should we talk a little bit?
Yeah, I was going to say, let's bring it back to the two wines there, and very quickly on the whole bunch sort of philosophy. I mean, this is a domain that has used this through its history, and as we know, this is a winemaking concept that became a bit more trendy about 10 years ago, with a lot of people who never did it doing it, and you've got obviously more Negauche doing it now. So all I'm saying is, I think they've always had a good handle on what works for them particularly, but also the style, the quality has maybe sort of been unspoken and hiding a little bit, whilst other domains quite often maybe get a bit more of a spotlight put on them. Clos de Vougeot is huge. There's 80 odd producers that make wine from there. So as a consumer, you face, well, I want to try Clos de Vougeot. I want to buy Clos de Vougeot. Who do I do it? There's so many offerings. You know, if I was asked who are the very best, without any hesitancy, I would say Château de la Tour are certainly top 5, possibly top 3 of people who make the best Clos de Vougeot. They age incredibly. And that's one of the things that I love about this. We'll maybe talk a bit about some older vintages in a moment. But coming back to the 24, so the Cuvée Classique for me, like the two very different. I thought the VV it had the typicity of Clos de Vougeot. That was muscular. It was, the fruit density was very apparent. The fruit smothered the tannins. It gave this shape that you would expect with Clos de Vougeot. But what I loved about the VV, and I'll come on to the classic in a moment, and the VAV is, if you like, sort of the next step up in terms of price and I guess regard within the range. There was this lovely mix of, my notes, red and black fruits, and I sort of said that there was these sort of hits of pomegranate and rhubarb, cranberry that was just sitting amongst this sort of dark Pinot fruit. And I think, that's a reflection of the growing season itself, because obviously, temperatures, luminosity, etc., you're going to get different profiles. But they'd managed to capture it in a really lovely weighted way. So there is texture there. And with that whole bunch note that was just coming through, there is these little pops of spices. And I think it would be an absolute beauty. The Cuvée Classique, so I would say that was more seductive versus the old vine. And the old vine, I think, will age, pretty remarkably. But saying that, versus the other big vintages, it will be ready to be pulled out of cellars and corks popped sooner. But the Cuvée Classique had this lovely seduction. That was interestingly more just for me with more dark fruited. It didn't have this sort of red fruit, which is, I think, when I got to tasting the VV, I was writing so excitedly about it. But brilliant concentration, lovely savoury element as well that comes through on the Cuvée Classique. But I just sort of underlined purity, fine, stony. And I loved that it had this sort of stony character really sort of taking the lead. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you wanted a Vougeot that would sort of give you a slightly earlier window, one with lovely minerality, with a lovely purity, maybe a bit more accessibility, the Cuvée Classique will offer that in 24 quite nicely. The VAV, I think you'll probably need to leave it sort of at least sort of 6-7 years really before pulling it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think both wines kind of confound expectations in the sense that they are quite seductive and they are quite dense. I mean, okay, Vougeot will always have a density to it, but I think in a vintage where you expect maybe sort of a bit more airiness, there's a real tactile kind of sense of presence about both of the wines. And I agree with you, Joe, that the Cuvée Classique has this wonderful sort of succulence and sweetness of fruit, and it's almost voluptuous, isn't it? It's really very impressive. But in terms of drinkability, maybe that leads us on to talking about vintages. And René, we were chatting before we started recording, and we've both, I think, had the 17,
the 2017. I think that's
VV recently, and it's showing beautifully. And so what's that in terms of? Okay, it's 7 years old. Is that right? Yeah. It's no, sorry, it's more than that, isn't it? It's 9 years old. But it's great. I mean, it's showing beautifully, and I think that probably is, in modern vintages terms, the sweet spot in terms of when you can start drinking these wines.
I think it's also a good sort of reference point to use in the 24 conversation, because 17, 21s, they are considered sort of the lighter vintages of Burgundy, and obviously 24 as a general rule is as well. So, even I think that the Cuvée Classique 24, you'll be able to take a case home in 3 years, 4 years, and open one at a dinner table. And I think that seductive, really lovely, exotic whole bunch character, that's, even though it's been reduced in balance with the fruit that's there. So you'll still get that, it's not going to dominate. So you'll still get the fruit character, but they will just be elevated by that whole bunch perfume. And so I think that will be wonderful to pull in 4 years. The Cuvée Classique, I think they will, that will sort of have a lot of joy as well in 6-7 years. But other vintages now, The 14, I had a Magnum of 14 last year that someone opened, which I just thought was delightful because it had a really lovely sweetness of fruit there. It did have that soaring spiciness that you'd expect to come with it. The 2010, that's in actually a pretty good place now. Cuvée Classique, and you could even sort of argue the Vigvine as well, because that's obviously a staggeringly good vintage for Burgundy.
Yeah.
But it's now showing its sort of flexing its muscles in a less sort of constrained way and in a more showy, demonstrative way. So yeah,
excellent.
So I think that these are wines that are very small, as you've touched on, 19 hectolitres per hectare.
Yeah.
The offer is going live this week. We have a very small quantity, and by that I mean in some scenarios less than 25 cases. So it's not going to be, if you blink you probably will miss it, but I can't encourage you enough. These are, as I mentioned, I think the best representation of Vougeot, one of the best people who knows how to make it, because this is what they do. They don't do any other Grand Cru. And in 24, it's a real gem to be added to the cellar.
Absolutely. Just to mention, they are real specialists of Clos de Vougeot. And as Joe said before, if you've got one Clos de Vougeot to taste and try and get into the Grand Cru, is it.
Perfect. Well done, guys. I think that's a wrap.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thanks for joining me again in the club room. This is a nice little environment to be doing these. We'll be back next week with a couple more pods. In the meantime, Guy, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Joe.
And René, thanks a lot for coming down and sharing your pearls.
Thank you.
Lovely. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.